Welcome to today's deep dive into one of the world's most elusive and unusual mammals, the Solenodons. Found only on a few Caribbean islands, these strange, shrew-like creatures are among the very few venomous mammals on Earth. They spend their lives hidden underground, rarely seen and even more rarely studied. Yet they represent one of the oldest surviving branches of placental mammals, with roots stretching back to the age of the dinosaurs. If you'd like to learn more, check out the document in the description with research papers and image credits. Small insectivorous mammals have long posed a challenge for researchers trying to untangle their evolutionary relationships. There are many different lineages that fit this general body plan, and because of their similar lifestyles, many have independently evolved similar traits, a phenomenon known as convergent evolution. This led early researchers to group Solenodons with other superficially similar animals like Tenrex and the giant water shrew, both African lineages. But modern genetic data has clarified things. Tenrex are part of Afrotheria, a group that also includes elephants and aardvarks, while Solenodons belong to the order Eulipotyphla. We have actually explored Eulipotyphla on this channel before, most recently in the episode on desmans, the small aquatic relatives of moles. But to place Solenodons in context, let's quickly go over the families within the order. Solenodons represent the most basal living branch of Eulipotyphla, meaning they split off earlier than any other surviving group. Molecular evidence suggests this divergence happened about 74 million years ago, during the age of the dinosaurs. Their closest known relatives are the now extinct West Indies shrews, or Nesophontidae. This actually makes geographical sense, as both groups were native to the Caribbean islands. However, they are still quite distantly related, thought to have diverged around 57 million years ago. West Indies shrews are only known from subfossils, but may have survived into relatively recent times. Some remains have been found alongside introduced rats, which didn't arrive in the Caribbean until European colonization in the 1500s. And that may not be a coincidence. Invasive species like rats are thought to have played a major role in their extinction. Unfortunately, this is more than just a historical footnote. Rats are also a serious threat to Solenodons today, raising fears that these last surviving members of a once broader lineage could suffer a similar fate if we're not careful. Moving to the other branch of Eulipotyphla, we find the moles in the family Talpidae. These are adapted for digging, with powerful forelimbs and poor eyesight, and although they're rarely seen, they are widespread. Then we have the shrews and Sauricidae. It might be surprising that shrews aren't more closely related to Solenodons, given their similar size and insectivorous habits. But again, these are examples of convergent evolution, not close ancestry. Still, they are far closer related than Tenrex or elephant shrews. Finally, there's Erinaceae, the group containing hedgehogs and moonrats. Hedgehogs, particularly the European species, are probably the most familiar members of the order to many people, an iconic part of the English countryside. Now that we've placed Solenodons on the mammalian family tree, let's take a closer look at their own lineage, Solenodontidae. This family is remarkable not just because of its rarity, but because it preserves traits that most other mammals lost long ago. In fact, Solenodons are often described as primitive mammals, not because they're less evolved, but because they've held on to several ancestral features from early placental mammals. Their skeletons show clues to this. They have long, narrow skulls, incomplete zygomatic arches, and a plantigrade gait, all features shared with some of the earliest eutherians, but are uncommon today. Even their brain size and sense reliance tell a story. Solenodons have relatively low brain-to-body ratios and are guided more by smell and touch than by sight, much like their distant ancestors likely were. In short, Solenodons offer a rare glimpse into what early insectivorous mammals might have looked like, a lineage that split off tens of millions of years ago and quietly kept going, while the rest of the mammal world changed around them. Both surviving Solenodon species, the Cuban and Hispaniolan, share a set of unusual features that set them apart from most modern mammals. They are nocturnal and burrowing, spending their days hidden in underground tunnels or natural crevices. At night they emerge to forage, guided mostly by an acute sense of smell and touch. Their long, mobile snouts are especially important here. Highly flexible and packed with nerve endings, they act almost like sensory probes for exploring the environment. Remarkably, the snout contains a ball and socket joint, the same type found in a human shoulder, which gives it exceptional freedom of movement. This allows the Solenodon not just to sniff out food, but to actively probe into narrow crevices and flush out hidden prey. Solenodons move with a distinctive, somewhat awkward gait, lifting their limbs high as they walk, a movement that, despite appearances, is surprisingly quiet and effective for slipping through undergrowth undetected. They also have relatively poor eyesight, a trait that makes sense given their subterranean and nocturnal habits. Their fur is coarse and bristly, and their large, nearly hairless ears are especially sensitive to sound. In terms of diet, Solenodons are generalist insectivores, but they won't turn down small vertebrates, carrion, or even fruit when available. Their long claws and strong forelimbs help them dig through soil and leaf litter, while their sharp teeth and powerful jaws make quick work of tougher prey. And notably, they reproduce slowly. Solenodons typically have 1 or 2 offspring per litter, and the young remain dependent for an extended period. They're even known for a peculiar trait. Females only have 2 teats located far back on the body near the rump, leading some researchers to comment that the young appear to ride the mother as they nurse. In rare cases, a 3rd offspring may be born, but it usually doesn't survive, unable to compete for one of the nursing spots and dying from malnutrition. All these features, from their sensory toolkit to their reproductive strategy, reflect an animal finely tuned for a niche lifestyle, but also one that may struggle to adapt quickly in a changing world. One of the most remarkable things about Solenodons is that they're venomous. It's a trait that's extremely rare in mammals, and it gives them a very unusual place in the evolutionary story. The venom is essentially modified saliva, produced by enlarged salivary glands in the lower jaw and delivered through deep grooves in their second lower incisors, an almost snake-like mechanism. When a Solenodon bites, venom runs along these grooves into the wound. It's primarily composed of serine proteases, enzymes that break down proteins and help immobilizing prey by interfering with blood pressure and clotting. These are especially effective against small vertebrates, like lizards and frogs, though the venom also works on invertebrates. Now, if you're wondering whether this makes them dangerous to humans, the answer is no. There's no evidence that Solenodon venom poses any real threat to people. Solenodon bites are extremely rare as they are shy, nocturnal animals, and the venom is adapted to subduing prey rather than defending against larger threats. Anecdotally, the few bite reports suggest it may cause minor irritation or swelling, but nothing medically significant. Still, among mammals, this venom system is incredibly rare. In fact, I've already featured most of the known venomous mammals in other videos on this channel, like the platypus and the slow loris. Most mammals rely on claws, speed, or social behaviors to survive, but Solenodons have developed a very different strategy, one that sets them apart from almost all of their relatives. As if venom wasn't unusual enough, Solenodons have another rare trait for a mammal. They echolocate. It's not quite on the level of a bat or dolphin, their system is far cruder, but it still qualifies as a form of biological sonar. Solenodons produce a series of rapid, high-pitched clicking sounds with their tongue. These clicks bounce off objects in their environment, and the returning echoes help them build a basic map of the space around them. It's a form of spatial navigation, helping them move through dark burrows and dense vegetation during their nighttime foraging. This isn't unique to Solenodons. Some species of shrews and tenrecs have also been shown to produce similar tongue-clicking sounds or squeaks for navigation. But unlike bats or dolphins, which use their voice box to generate highly structured calls and process incredibly fine detail, Solenodon echolocation is relatively unsophisticated. It's not about tracking flying insects or fish, it's about not walking into a rock. And, honestly, you don't need to be all that sophisticated to manage that. Still, for a small, burrowing mammal, even this crude echolocation is surprisingly useful. It may even help to explain how these animals manage to forage so effectively in near-total darkness. Now that we've talked about venom and echolocation, you might be wondering, if Solenodons and shrews both have these traits, are they actually that different? After all, they're both small, nocturnal, insect-eating mammals, and they're even in the same order, Eulipotyphla. But, as we saw early in the phylogeny, they aren't each other's closest relatives. In fact, Solenodons and shrews are about as distantly related as two groups can be while still remaining within Eulipotyphla. This leaves us with two possibilities. Either their last common ancestor had venom and echolocation, and those traits were later lost in hedgehogs, moles, and other relatives, or they evolved these features independently. At first glance, this might seem like a difficult puzzle to solve, but when you look closely at the details, a clear pattern emerges. These traits are the result of convergent evolution. That is, similar solutions arising in unrelated groups due to similar ecological pressures. Let's start with venom. Both Solenodons and certain shrews deliver venomous bites, but they do so using different teeth, glands, and venom types. Solenodons inject venom through deep grooves in their second lower incisors, using a toxin-rich saliva produced in modified submaxillary salivary glands. Shrews, in contrast, deliver venom via grooves in their first upper or lower incisors, depending on the species, and the venom itself is chemically distinct, often containing paralytic compounds like sauricidin, which aren't found in Solenodons. The glands involved are different too, with shrew venom typically produced in the submandibular glands. These anatomical and biochemical differences strongly suggest that venom evolved independently in each lineage. If it had been inherited from a common ancestor, we'd expect a more similar delivery mechanism, venom composition, or at least signs of it in other related species. But we don't. In fact, most shrews aren't venomous at all, indicating that venom arose only in certain subgroups, like the genera Blarina and Neomes. Echolocation tells a similar story, although the evidence is a bit murkier. Both Solenodons and some shrews use high-pitched tongue clicks to navigate in low-light conditions. But this is a relatively crude form of echolocation, not the complex sonar systems found in bats or dolphins. There's no evidence that their last common ancestor used echolocation, and it's entirely absent in related groups like hedgehogs and moles. This again points toward a case of independent origin, two separate evolutionary paths arriving at a similar low-cost solution for navigating in the dark. In both cases then, the similarities between Solenodons and shrews are convergent, not ancestral. These animals have arrived at similar traits because they face similar ecological challenges, not because they inherited those traits from the same ancestor. It's a fascinating reminder that even among close relatives, evolution doesn't always move in a straight line. Sometimes it loops back and reinvents the same tool in a slightly different form. Solenodons are remarkable not just for what they are, but for what they represent, a relic lineage that once had a much broader presence. While only 2 species remain today, Solenodons were once part of a more diverse group that included both recently extinct and prehistoric relatives. The best known of these is Solenodon, Solenodon maconoi, a recently extinct species from Hispaniola. Known from subfossil remains, it was slightly smaller than the living Hispaniolan Solenodon, and likely occupied a similar ecological role. It may have survived well into the Holocene, possibly within the last few hundred years, before succumbing to habitat loss and invasive species like rats and mongooses. Cuba may have once hosted a giant Solenodon, possibly Solenodon arredondoi, though the taxonomy is debated. Fossil remains suggest a significantly larger body size than the modern Cuban Solenodon, and its disappearance may have been similarly linked to environmental changes or human arrival. Beyond these recent extinctions, there's also fossil evidence of ancient Solenodontids from the Miocene and Pliocene in the Caribbean, particularly in Cuba and the Dominican Republic. These fossils showed a wider range of body sizes and skull morphologies, suggesting the group once occupied a broader range of ecological roles than today. And intriguingly, there are also disputed remains from North America, including Eocene and Oligocene fossils that may represent early relatives or stem members of the Solenodontid lineage. While classification is uncertain, many specimens are fragmentary and could belong to broader insectivorous groups. Their presence has led some researchers to propose that Solenodontids or their ancestors once ranged across North America before becoming restricted to the Caribbean. This aligns with molecular data suggesting Solenodonts diverged from other Eulipotyphlans as far back as the late Cretaceous, well before the islands they now inhabit had fully formed. Altogether, the fossil and molecular evidence paints a picture of Solenodons as survivors of a once more widespread lineage, whose evolutionary history includes dispersal, extinction, and longer periods of isolation. Their current distribution, limited to just 2 Caribbean islands, represents the final holdouts of a group that was once far more expansive. And with threats like habitat destruction and invasive predators still looming, the fate of modern Solenodons could mirror their lost relatives, unless serious conservation action is taken. Of the 2 surviving Solenodon species, the Hispaniolan Solenodon is the better known and more widely studied. Endemic to the island of Hispaniola, shared by the Dominican Republic and Haiti, it is believed to have once ranged across much of the island. Today, however, its distribution is patchy and fragmented, with relatively stable populations in the Dominican Republic and far more precarious ones in Haiti. The Hispaniolan Solenodon is the larger of the 2 living species, though its biology follows the typical Solenodon pattern: nocturnal, insectivorous, venomous, and burrow-dwelling. It prefers humid forests and mountainous terrain, but shows notable tolerance for a broad range of habitats, including disturbed environments such as farmland and scrubland near human settlements. Despite this adaptability, Solenodons remain elusive. Even locals rarely see them, and their movements while foraging are erratic, often described as a zigzagging shuffle through the undergrowth. Their diet includes a variety of invertebrates like insects, worms, and spiders, as well as small vertebrates such as lizards and possibly rodents, which they subdue using their venom. Although classified as least concern by the IUCN, the species has experienced moderate declines, mainly due to habitat loss, fragmentation, and predation by introduced species such as feral cats, dogs, and mongooses. Their secretive nature complicates conservation monitoring, and while they are legally protected and present in several national parks, enforcement is often limited, especially in Haiti. Conservation is further complicated by their slow birth rate. Solenodons produce just 1 to 2 young per litter, making their overall reproductive output much lower than other small mammals. While their exact lifespan in the wild is unknown, mammals of their size often have short life expectancies. If Solenodons follow this trend, it would mean relatively few offspring over a lifetime, posing a challenge for population recovery. Even so, there are reasons for cautious optimism. As recently as 2008, the species was listed as endangered, but the discovery of new populations led to a reassessment and downgrade in threat level. International programs such as the Edge of Existence Initiative and the Dural Wildlife Conservation Trust are now involved in protecting key populations. In Haiti, however, the outlook remains bleak. Surveys in Haiti suggest the species survives only in a few remaining forested areas, particularly in the massif de la Haute mountain range, and may already be extinct elsewhere in the country. Preserving these last habitats may be essential for the species' long-term survival. The Cuban Solenodon was long feared extinct. Endemic to Cuba, it was originally described in the 19th century, but sightings dwindled so dramatically that by the mid-20th century, many scientists presumed it had disappeared altogether. No confirmed records existed after 1890 until 1974, when a live specimen was captured, reigniting scientific interest. A few more individuals were observed later that decade, but the species vanished from view again until 2003, when another live animal was caught. Nicknamed Alejandrito, it was studied for 2 days before being safely released. Even today, this species remains one of the most elusive mammals in the world, with only 2 small populations currently known. Taxonomically, the Cuban Solenodon was once placed in the same genus as its Hispaniolan counterpart, but genetic and morphological analyses have since revealed that it is distinct enough to warrant its own genus, Atopogale. This makes it the sole representative of a deeply isolated lineage, with no close living relatives. It's another reflection of the long and separate evolutionary journeys of Solenodons on their respective islands. The Cuban Solenodon is smaller and more gracile than the Hispaniolan species. It has shorter limbs and tail, and its fur is typically darker and more uniform. Despite these differences, it shares the Solenodon's hallmark characteristics: an elongated, flexible snout, venomous bite, and nocturnal insectivorous habits. This species is currently known from the eastern mountain ranges of Cuba, especially the Sierra de Cristal and surrounding areas in the Holguin and Guantanamo provinces. It appears to prefer humid montane forests, particularly above 600 meters, where it forages in the deep leaf litter for invertebrates and possibly small vertebrates. Much of its ecology, however, remains poorly understood, and its full distribution is likely underreported due to the difficulty of surveying its remote habitat. The Cuban Solenodon is listed as endangered by the IUCN, and it faces even greater threats than its Hispaniolan cousin. The main pressures are similar: habitat loss from agriculture and logging, and predation by introduced species such as dogs, cats, and especially the small Indian mongoose, which was brought to Cuba to control pests in sugar plantations, but has proven devastating to native wildlife. Efforts to conserve the species have been hampered by its rarity and the rugged, inaccessible terrain it inhabits. Still, there have been positive developments. Field surveys, camera trapping, and habitat monitoring are ongoing, and recent records suggest that small populations persist in a few protected areas. However, no formal recovery plan is currently in place, and without sustained intervention, the Cuban Solenodon's future remains uncertain. In many ways, it is a living relic, a survivor of a lineage that once spanned the Caribbean. But like so many island endemics, it now teeters on the edge. Ensuring its survival may depend not only on protecting its remaining habitat, but also on increasing our understanding of its biology and ecology before it's too late. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the secretive world of Solenodons. From venomous bites to crude echolocation, these ancient insectivores are some of the most unusual mammals alive today. They are evolutionary relics, survivors from a time when the Caribbean hosted an entire menagerie of now vanished mammals. And yet, despite their deep evolutionary roots, their biology is full of unexpected twists. From ball and socket snouts to venom systems found almost nowhere else in the mammal world, they are truly a unique group. So, if this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much we don't know about the life hiding in our forests, and every strange species we study brings us closer to understanding how evolution really works. Thanks for watching. If there's another fascinating species you'd like to learn more about, let me know in the comments below.